I really look at this session you guys are in right now as free Composer training. I know you came all the way to Texas to get it, but if this content is good for you and you think you could use more of it, much of this is directly out of my experience teaching the Composer class. So either with us or with your reseller close to you, the Composer class would expand on all this content. This is really directly out of my experiences teaching that class. So if this is good for you, look at that class, try and take it. It's usually a 3-day class. I've done it in 2 days depending, because one thing about Composer is it could be salespeople, it could be marketing people, it could be engineers. I've had owners of companies take the class. It's really, with SOLIDWORKS, it's just engineers. That's usually it, right? With Composer, it's a wide variety of people. So it's typically a 2 to 3 day class, but definitely check it out. It's a really, really great class. Did I mention I like showing pictures of Leon at all? She sent me that one yesterday, and I was like, oh my God, I got to come home. He's awesome. But I can't wait to get home and see him. All right, so just a quick overview about Prism. This will be just a minute or two again, so you guys are familiar with me and where I'm coming from. We've been around since the early 90s. We actually first started out selling Mastercam. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Mastercam in the room, but it's CNC software. We picked up SOLIDWORKS when SOLIDWORKS really came out in the mid-90s, and we picked up 3D printing in early 2000s. We now are really the only reseller that offers those 3 products, Mastercam, SOLIDWORKS, and Stratasys printers. Other resellers have kind of different combinations of products. We're the only one who does all 3 of those. With that too, we have a 3D printing service bureau. So if you ever want to check out the website, submit a model to us, we could send you a quote and ship it out to you. We offer a wide variety of materials and finishes and densities and all that kind of stuff. Check it out. That's right on prismeng.com. We also have an engineering services division. So aside from selling all the software and teaching it and all the traditional stuff that resellers do, we have an internal engineering design division. Really, it's a contract analysis, contract design work, all that traditional stuff you would expect from a mechanical engineering company. We offer that as well. Any of the techs, then any downtime between calls, that gives you something to kind of work on. Although Heather's in the room, Heather and Amanda, they can probably tell there's not much downtime between tech support calls. So. All right, Prism's about 45 employees. We're just under that 50 mark. We do have 7 regional facilities. Our headquarters is in Horsham, Pennsylvania, which is just outside of Philadelphia, not too far from there, and that's where I'm based out of. We have other offices as well. Most of these offices, the primary reason for them is training facilities. We hold training classes at all these places. Full, training room set up with machines and projector and computers and all that kind of stuff. All the things you would expect from a training facility. In Horsham, we have a 3D printing lab, so we try and almost showcase the main printers that we have. Make a internal room where we can have the best printers in there. So when someone's spending sometimes 6 figures on a 3D printer, it's nice to be able to come in and see it first before you're placing that order. So that's the purpose of the 3D printing lab in Horsham. This just gives you an idea of our footprint in our region. Again, I know many of you folks probably aren't from our area, but this just kind of gives you an idea where we cover, the different states that we cover. We got hammered by snow like 2 weeks, so this whole area was under like 2 feet of snow. Last weekend we finally dug out. So this session, moving on, the description as advertised for this was this session will provide an overview and basic introduction to using SOLIDWORKS Composer. SOLIDWORKS Composer allows SOLIDWORKS users and non-SOLIDWORKS users, that's a big thing we're going to talk about a lot, to leverage existing CAD data to publish images, create animations for use in technical publications. This is just a quick description of what you can expect from this session. My big takeaway here is that this isn't just for SOLIDWORKS users, and we'll harp on that quite a bit. That Composer, from my experience teaching it and selling it and just kind of seeing it in the field, it's not typically an engineer. It's usually someone else. It's funny, it usually comes out of engineering's budget, though, because engineering wants the company to get it. But I've seen it in such a wide variety of scenarios. This is definitely a beginner-level session. So if anybody in here is a Composer expert, this will probably be a large review for you. But if you're just looking for basic intro into Composer, I'm compressing just about as much as I can from the Composer class into this 1-hour session. You guys are in the right place. Just a quick plug, too. Other Prism sessions. Sean O'Neill is doing a session right after this one, actually, evaluating your parts KPIs with the SOLIDWORKS API. strangely enough, Sean's our marketing manager, but he's doing an API presentation. That just tells you that at Prism, we're a very technical company. We're about half the people in the company are technical. Even our marketing manager is a CSWE. So he's doing a great session on some API stuff. It's an intermediate session, so if you're not familiar with API, it might be maybe more than you want to deal with at the moment. But Sean's a great presenter. I can't recommend it enough. If you're looking for another session right after this one, check it out. All right, so what we're going to cover here, the agenda. What is tech documentation with or without Composer? Once we have figured that out, let's start with importing a file from as it sits in SOLIDWORKS into Composer. This is from the ground up. I haven't pre-cooked any files. I haven't done anything beforehand. This is from the ground up, bringing a file into Composer and starting with it from scratch. Once we bring that file in, and there's some things to watch for when you're bringing it in, we're going to create images, create animations, and create interactive content. Those are the three main buckets we see in Composer use. Those are the main three things you're going to get out of the tool. Once you've made that content, once you've gone through all those steps to make the content, whether it's images, animations, or the interactive content, what happens if something changes? What happens if the SOLIDWORKS file has been updated by engineering, or you wanted to add a part to it or something, some minor change, or even a major change from the CAD file? We're going to talk about updating Composer. That's one of the best things about Composer is if something changes, you can update either the entire assembly, the whole part, or the whole group of parts, or just one particular component. If you know that one component had a slight design change, you can update just that one part. So we're going to cover that as well. And then just general Composer tips and tricks I've picked up along the way just through different training classes and tech sessions, tech support sessions. There's just some good stuff to know about Composer before you really dig into it, so you guys don't have to take the time to learn it. I'll hopefully get that knowledge to you much faster today. Okay, so what's technical documentation? What am I considering technical documentation? Instruction manuals, service manuals, exploded views, animations, marketing or website materials. You guys could probably think of a lot of others as well that would fall under this heading, but it's really, once you've made the CAD file, once you've made the SOLIDWORKS file, what else can we do with it other than obviously get it manufactured? That's hopefully what we're modeling it in SOLIDWORKS for, right? Tech documentation is now that we have it in SOLIDWORKS, we have to show it in a manual so we know how to clean it or know how to service it. Have it on the assembly floor so that the folks who are on the assembly line know how to put it together, that kind of stuff. Really all of that falls under tech documentation. And again, you guys could probably think of some other examples for that, but this is kind of just some of the things I'm going to talk about and use today. So tech documentation created without Composer. Let's take Composer off the table for a second. Carlos, we were talking on the way in, and Jeff, we were talking on the way in as well, just about some of the things that people typically do. If you don't have Composer and you're making tech documentation, it probably means you're doing digital pictures. You've maybe prototyped your part or actually manufactured it and have it completed. You're doing digital pictures to show in a manual or show in some type of publication. You're doing screenshots from SOLIDWORKS. That's honestly the biggest competitor to Composer when we go in and sell it to someone is, well, I just do screenshots out of SOLIDWORKS. And I know that's pretty cool because the SOLIDWORKS models look good. You spent a lot of time putting the colors in there and the details and all that stuff. So yeah, a screenshot from SOLIDWORKS, okay, that works in a lot of scenarios, but that stuff can't be updated. If anything changes, if you're down the line, you've made 100 screenshots and you've published your manual and you're ready to roll, and then somebody swaps out a part, well, you got to go back and redo all those screenshots, all those digital pictures, all that kind of stuff. So this also isn't concurrent. So this means that when you're creating this stuff, you have to wait until you either have that prototype or you have that finished part. So you can't do it concurrently with your design process. One thing you're going to see about Composer is once you have the first revision, really the first version of your part or assembly, you can get started on Composer. Whether it's yourself, whether it's the engineering person, the SOLIDWORKS user, or if it's someone else. Ideally, Carlos, you said your secretary does this, right? So Composer can end up in the hands of someone else who can get very efficient with it and all of a sudden start saving the company all this time because if you're doing screenshots and digital pictures, you got to wait till the end. It's not something you can do concurrently. So this kind of content created with Composer, This content is created in a purpose-built tool. Composer is made to do this stuff, made cool line art views and arrows with indicators and that kind of stuff. You're not going to really do that in SOLIDWORKS very easily. Add arrows and add call-outs and those types of things. You can. It would be kind of a difficult process. This stuff can be updated. One of the things we're going to cover here is how do we update? What's that process look like? And I can't harp on this enough. SOLIDWORKS or non-SOLIDWORKS users can do this. It doesn't have to be the engineering person. Again, I will say and SOLIDWORKS has data to back this up as well. The purchase seems to usually come from engineering when a company buys Composer, because the engineering team wants the company to have it, because it's usually someone coming up, Jeff, we were talking about this, and tapping the engineer on the shoulder and saying, hey, can you get me a screenshot of that? Can you turn it purple and do an exploded view and rotate it around, and that's not quite right, can you do it 6 more times? So that stuff really slows you down. That stuff really does bog the whole process down. Whereas if you have Composer's on someone else's computer, they don't even need write access to the SOLIDWORKS files. They can be read-only. It can just be a version. If you have PDM, they could be in a folder where they don't have write access to it. They just have read-only. They can just take a version of it. That allows that person to get started on this content that much sooner. And hopefully by the time you're actually done designing and you get towards that finish line with your product, the tech documentation is right there with it. It's not something that has to be jammed in at the end. This isn't a giant sales pitch for Composer. I'm sure it sounds like that a little bit, but this is stuff you need to know about Composer and what it's for and why people seem to like it so much. Sometimes the sales guys always tell me I'm too much of a trainer, and the training guys tell me I'm too much of a sales guy sometimes. So I go back and forth quite a bit. But it's just I can't tell you how much I think Composer is a useful tool. All right, so now we're going to get into back and forth live action here with Composer and between the presentation. So importing files into Composer, this is where you begin. You have your version of the SOLIDWORKS part or assembly, and we're ready to bring it into Composer. So the idea there is you have a copy of this SOLIDWORKS file on your machine or on the server or something. You have access to it. It can be something you just have read-only access to, as long as you can see it and you have a local version of it. It could be a copy of the original, just in case you're still worried about damaging that SOLIDWORKS file. It could be a copy of it. Really, it's up to you. But as long as you can find and browse to that SOLIDWORKS assembly, we can bring it in. You'll see some of the other files here too when looking. I'm going to show you this live in just a second. But in Composer, when we do file open, this is the list, and this list should look pretty familiar to you. It's pretty similar to what we see in SOLIDWORKS. It's a lot of the same files. When we're bringing in these two formats, SOLIDWORKS part or SOLIDWORKS assembly, it actually uses SOLIDWORKS under the hood to bring these files in. You'll actually see SOLIDWORKS open the file, and then close. If you don't have SOLIDWORKS on the machine, Carlos, I'm sure your secretary doesn't have SOLIDWORKS on her machine, right? You can load SOLIDWORKS Importer. It's like a little chunk of SOLIDWORKS that loads on the computer, and it's free. It comes with Composer if you don't have SOLIDWORKS on that machine. It's like SOLIDWORKS Importer. Yep, Importer. And you only see that in a very small part of the install, and it prevents you from doing both of them. It doesn't want you to do the Importer and SOLIDWORKS at the same time. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's just to let you know you don't have to have SOLIDWORKS on the machine to bring files in. So let's jump out to Composer and take a look. My mouse is on like a slant up here, so if you see my mouse just kind of like fall off the screen, don't be alarmed. It's just this podium's a little strange up here. So I'll jump out to Composer. This is what Composer currently looks like as it sits in this current version. It's interesting. Composer had its colors and its design interface change before SOLIDWORKS did. So Composer is almost like my precursor. Like, uh-oh, why is everything blue now in Composer? And then all of a sudden the next version of SOLIDWORKS was as we see it today. So in Composer, let's do the same thing we just saw a second ago. I'll do File, Open, and if we browse and take a look at this list, I have a zooming utility I use here. If that makes anybody motion sick in the room, just let me know and I'll stop doing it so much. But if we look at this list, again, we're looking for that SOLIDWORKS part or SOLIDWORKS assembly that we want to bring in. So I'm going to switch to just SOLIDWORKS assembly just so we kind of wipe this slate clean here and just look at just assemblies. In this folder, we're going to talk about what this assembly is in just a second. This is what I'm going to select. I'm going to select the whole top-level assembly that I want to bring in. The only thing I don't like about Composer, and you'll see this as soon as you use it, This open screen is a little different than what you're used to in SOLIDWORks. You don't have your nice shortcuts for folders like you do. You can't browse quite as easily. It's a little bit different, but once you get used to it, it's not so bad. In SOLIDWORks, you know you have those shortcuts for part assembly and drawing, and they're really useful. They're fast filters. You just don't have that in Composer, so you want to kind of know where you're headed when you come into Composer. It's just to save you a little bit of time browsing to the file. So if I'm going to click and bring that file into Composer, this is just one of the assemblies. There's a couple assemblies in that folder, but that's the one I'm going to bring in, and then we're going to talk about these settings in just a second. So when we bring a file into Composer, you have to choose a profile. You have to choose some group of settings. On that window I was just on, you notice again it looks different. It's not your traditional import window. I have the assembly chosen, and then you have some new options down here at the bottom. These options are critical for how this part comes into Composer. It is extremely important to pay close attention to these. When I get tech support calls on Composer that things aren't lining up right or there's extra items in the tree, this is the first place I look. And usually the first question I ask is how was your import settings set when you imported this file to begin with? And usually people don't know. They're like, import settings? I just hit file open and let it come right in. You really want to pay close attention to this, because what this window is doing is it's asking you what do you want to bring in from the SOLIDWORKS file. Things like import bodies, import points, curves, free faces. Free faces are surfaces. So you have a lot of different options for what it's going to grab from SOLIDWORKS and bring it in. There's settings here that are really important, things you need to watch for. But one of the nice things is when you hit that drop down, you'll notice there's a nice button for SOLIDWORKS. Let me see if I can zoom in while that's up. There's a nice SOLIDWORKS default. So you can just click SOLIDWORKS. This is my profile. Zoom back out. And it will set everything for you. You don't have to think about it. And this is what you want to look for. The most important setting you're going to see in here is this top checkbox, merge file into one actor per part. Actors are everything in Composer. If you just hear that term, a part is an actor, an arrow is an actor. They're all actors. So what that does is it looks back to the part file, and you're familiar that SOLIDWORKS files can have multi-bodies in them. They can have multiple solid bodies in the part file. This checkbox takes all those bodies and merges them into one thing, one entity here on Composer, which at first you're like, well, maybe I don't want that. You can break them out afterwards if there's particular ones that you want to. For the most part, trust me, you want to have this on. Because what it does, even if you have it off, even if you only have one body, it'll bring the part and then bring the body and then bring the part and then bring the body. So you essentially double your tree all the way down, which is unnecessary and it makes things a lot more complicated. So we're going to choose the SOLIDWORKS profile. I make sure to choose merge file into one actor per part, and those are the settings I'm going to use to bring this in. Okay, so once we bring it in, the first thing you want to do is save that file. That's another thing I see a lot of times is when somebody creates a file in Composer, it almost hangs on to the SOLIDWORKS part until you hit save, until you create that file, this SMG for Composer, which we'll talk about in a second. So let's bring this in. Let's see what it looks like live. I'm going to pick this assembly. I'm going to click open. I'm going to make sure I have my import SOLIDWORKS settings set as default, and we'll hit open. It says launching SOLIDWORKS, opening file, starting conversion. So it actually, again, launches SOLIDWORKS in the background, opens that file, kicks me out of Composer for some reason. We'll get back in there. And it does this little conversion here. You can click this too if you want to see more information, but in this case, we'll just kind of let this run. This says starting conversion. It's converting the whole drone. You're going to see more about this assembly in just a second. But it's converting this to a SOLIDWORKS Composer file here. So again, nothing pre-cooked here. This is what you'll expect with maybe a medium-sized assembly, this first conversion. The first time is this, maybe minute, maybe 1 to 2 minutes. But after that, after this thing is here, saved as Composer, it's lightning quick to open. It'll open in just a moment. Composer, on a side note, is actually a really great tool for dealing with large assemblies. I'm not even including that in this presentation, but it's so good at opening huge files that it's a really great navigation tool for opening a big assembly and moving around it and just kind of checking it out and hiding and showing parts, that kind of stuff. It just works really well. So we've brought this in, and as my last slide mentioned, the first thing you want to do is save this. I'm going to zoom into this name up here, because these tabs here will actually indicate what you have open. You can tab open multiple files in Composer, but you notice the extension still, .sldasm. So it's kind of still looking at that SOLIDWORKS file. It's still kind of hooked on to that assembly. So as soon as I hit save, it will take this assembly and save it right into the root folder where I opened it from. It'll save it as an SMG and save it right into this folder. Where if I do File, Save As, then I get to at least choose. Then I get to pick where it's going to save it. So I kind of recommend that. Open the file, let it convert, let it open, and then choose where you're going to save it. You'll notice the extension here, .smg. That's the extension you're going to see with Composer. That's the file type. So if I jump back to PowerPoint here for just a second, an SMG is all the property, all the geometry, and all the view information under one single file. There is other options for Composer files. I don't have time to cover them in this session, the things you can do with them. They're a little bit more advanced because you can pick and choose kind of what you're saving and what you're taking out, that kind of stuff. But for the purposes of this class, and really for even myself as a Composer user, SMG gets the job done just about 90% of the time. The reason is it's like almost a zip file. It captures everything and puts it in one easy to work with file. If you choose these other ones, you'll end up with like 4 or 5 different Composer files because it breaks them out, which is useful down the road. If you want to do some custom stuff, kind of swapping geometry in and out, it's useful. But when you're getting started with Composer, save as SMG. So we'll come back here. I'm going to choose Save as SMG. I'm in that root folder. Maybe I'll just make a new folder for today. We'll just call it Composer. Save that off. We'll pick that folder. And it's telling me it's going to take the original name of the assembly and append it with .smg. It's the new file. We'll hit Save. Now we see this file extension up here, .smg. Life's good. I brought it in. I converted the SOLIDWORKS assembly to a Composer file. I hit Save and I converted it to an SMG. At this point, it's completely detached from the assembly. The engineers are still working on that thing. You're concurrent now. The tech pub person can get to work on the Composer file, and SOLIDWORKS is off and running by itself. You've now kind of separated the two. All right, so what is this thing? Quick note on what are we looking at here? This is a Prism 3D printed drone that we did. I didn't bring it here. I didn't really think I should bring this on the plane, so I didn't bring this thing with me here to Texas. But every year we build a new data set to show what's new with SOLIDWORKS to our customers. We have a couple of customers our customers in the room with us today, so thanks for coming, guys. And we kind of just try and come up with something creative, something that I think tells a good story, and it allows us to really use the software and beat it up and really deliver the message of what's new and maybe what's not so good, maybe what to watch out for in the new version. So this year we just finished up the rollouts, in the fall. I'm sure a lot of you folks went to your rollouts in your areas. This is what we came up with. These files, if you guys are ever into this, Tom Smith and I spent a lot of time on this, but if you're ever into these drones or that kind of stuff, you can download these files on MakerBot's website and 3D print your own drone. You got to buy the electronics and assemble it and that kind of stuff, but it is really cool. I actually have a video here of this thing flying. This was in our office, and you'll see my boss hiding behind the door there because this was probably a very bad idea to fly this inside of the building. It did end up crashing, and you'll see here there was shrapnel, there was all sorts of mayhem, but it does fly. Thanks to Tom Smith, by the way. Tom Smith helped me out with that, some new software for it. But it's really cool. It was a really cool experiment, a really cool process for us. And what better use of Composer? I don't know if anybody actually saw this morning, up on the main screen on the main session this morning, they put the parrot, maybe Tom, you saw it, the parrot in Composer. And I was like, hey, I'm doing that today. This is almost like the same thing. So this thing does fly. It again, is pretty cool. I was just getting used to this thing, and I flew it outside of my house, and it went like 50 feet in the air. In like a second, I had to dive, and catch it before it crashed. But very bad idea to fly this inside. It was not a good idea. Very deadly. Heather was hiding behind the wall there. Make sure she didn't get killed. You'll see Ron Swanson on the wall, and then I crashed into the chair. So still cool. It's okay. We just had some new propellers to put on it. No problem. So that's the data set we're working with here. That's what you're going to see in Composer. And again, this is a perfect example. You got to make instruction manuals or service manuals, something to remove the propellers, provide information, something. And this is not a pre-cooked data set. This is something we made from scratch. And we did download the files online, but then we remodeled everything from scratch as original SOLIDWORKS parts. The ones online are just going to be STLs, just generic files. But check that out. It's pretty cool. It was a pretty cool project. So the content we're now going to make with this file in Composer, now that we've brought it in, saved as an SMG, the three things we talked about: images, animations, and interactive content. Those are the three main buckets we're gonna kind of drop this content into and we're gonna use here. Images is the first thing we're gonna do. We're gonna make a few preset images that I want to use. This is not your tool for making the finished product tech documentation. You're not going to make the whole entire document here in Composer. You're making the graphical content for those documents. Carlos, we were talking, you guys use Word, right? Microsoft Word afterwards, and that's a great tool just to take these images, even some other content, and drop it into Word or any other publisher or some other secondary program. But we're going to make the images to start with. Once we have those images, we're going to move into making animations, and you'll see that you can even use the images to make the animations, which is pretty cool. It's a nice shortcut. And then once we have those all created, wrapped up in that one SMG file that we talked about, we can take that SMG and publish interactive content, something that's a little more high-end, a little bit more unique to Composer that you're really just not going to get out of any other tool. So images, let's talk about those first. I always call them the low-hanging fruit, the bread and butter of Composer. When we meet with someone and we talk about Composer, almost day one, you can be productive with Composer and make images with it. It is so easy. You guys will see what it's like to make images in just a second. They really are very fast to make in Composer. They're easily exported. The naming template we're going to use allows these files to be named and saved appropriately. It makes it really simple. Cutaways with arrows, bill of materials, views that would almost really be impossible with any other tool. Composer really does very quickly. So let's take a look at some examples. I'm going to switch out to Composer here. So my recommendations for getting started here, for making views, we're talking about images first. Once you bring the assembly into Composer, it's going to feel very familiar to you if you're a SOLIDWORKS user. All the controls can be set the same. All the controls, zooming in and out, panning, middle mouse button to rotate, a lot of that stuff will feel very at home to you if you're used to that with SOLIDWORKS already. So if I want to just save off something almost to remember where I was, where it was when it originally came in from SOLIDWORKS, I like to open the file, save it as an SMG like we already did, and then right away, come over here. I'm going to zoom in so you can see where this button is. This button right here is Create View. That is one of the most important buttons in this little interface here, because as soon as I hit Create View, it saves that off over there as almost like a stamped point in time. What was the assembly like at this point when you hit Create View, and it takes it and saves it off. These views in Composer are your saved off changes to these actors. We'll call them actors. They're your saved off changes. So for example, if I pick the GoPro camera, if I pick the whole camera here, you'll notice that this properties pane, I'm going to scroll it up so we can get a little more space here. This properties pane will fill in, there goes my crazy mouse, with properties about that component. Its color, its name, its opacity, how opaque is it. All this different information that we want to know about that particular component are its properties, its information that it loaded in from SOLIDWORKS. Its colors, all that kind of stuff is all embedded in that file. Even custom properties. I'm sure a lot of you folks are familiar with custom properties in SOLIDWORKS. Custom properties come into Composer, so we can use them for callouts, bill of materials, that kind of stuff. So when I'm looking at these views and I have that particular component, if I were to change that component, we take the GoPro and turn it green, for example. Now it's like a shade of green, and I hit Create View. All that view does is save off that one difference, that one change between the two views. So I can switch back to View 1 or switch back to View 2, and we'll just see that subtle change load in. This is a very simple example, but you can imagine everything you can do there. You're changing colors, you're changing opacities, you're changing locations for parts. We're going to move parts around and push them all around the assembly. You're changing whether the part's there at all. You might completely turn a part off and make it invisible. Yes, Carlos?
If you have configuration in your assembly, does Composer also bring all the configuration?
That's a great question. I'm actually going to touch on that when we get to updating. We're going to see that when we update. But I'll just show you real quick. When you do File Open, and I pick that assembly, I'll switch back to SOLIDWORKS Assemblies here, and we'll go back one folder, and I pick that assembly. One of the buttons here is SOLIDWORKS, and it says Select the configuration to open. So it does dig into that file and find those configurations. This really shows you the integration between the two, how how tightly knit Composer is with SOLIDWORKS that it can even find configurations in those files. Okay, but I will touch on that more, Carlos, when we get to updating this assembly. So I'm going to go back to view 1, and it's just as easy as this. If I don't want view 2, I just click it and hit delete on my keyboard, and it's gone. I don't really need view 2 for anything. In SOLIDWORKS, you're very familiar with the fact that you should name your features, right? You should name your features, your sketches, your planes, really name everything. In Composer, it's no different. So when you get these views, give them a name that makes sense to you, something that really helps you remember what that view is, because the only thing you get is a little thumbnail to tell you what that view is. So if you have a name, it's going to help you remember again what that view really is. So we'll call this default. So that's my default view. So if we kind of take a recap here, I've imported this file, I've saved it as an SMG, and I hit create view almost immediately. What's nice about that is that gives you a home, a nice default view to return to. So no matter what I do to change this, modify its settings, modify any of these parts, I always know what it was last time it came in from SOLIDWORKS, what that default view, that default group of settings looks like. So I can do whatever I want to this thing, and I know I can easily get back to that default view. All right, so let's make some more views. Let's just talk about some of the things you can do here in Composer. On the Home tab, Home is where you'll find all sorts of things for visibility of components, selecting components, turning on the animation time bar, just some useful stuff. But for the most part, we're going to make views. You're going to go to the Render tab, because Render is where you get to change things that you're almost used to from SOLIDWORKS, where Mode, we'll see you can change hidden lines visible, hidden lines removed, shaded with edges is some of the terms you're familiar with in SOLIDWORKS. Where if I drop that down in Composer, Composer calls them thing, I know that's kind of small for the people in the back, but Composer calls it smooth or smooth with outline, actually outline all the components. Shaded illustration with color or with silhouette, for example. I always compare these to IKEA. These are almost like your IKEA manual type views here. And if we drop that down a little further, we'll get to silhouette. Silhouette is like a really nice line art drawing, just really quickly, just gets all the edges of that component. And we're seeing the DS logo bleed through the thing right now, and the floor is showing some different things we don't want to see. So if we zoom in right here, you can see I can turn off the ground, turn off the grid. You could have mirror, you could have shadow on as well. But if we turn those off, turn off the grid, turn off the ground, and I want to turn that background maybe a white to really make this view pop, to help this thing pop. If I just click in the background, I'm just clicking kind of here in free space, it's actually showing me here properties for the background. So this little properties pane is very dynamic. It's going to update with whatever you have picked. Anything in Composer, the ground, an arrow, a component, one of the actual components, a whole group of components, whatever you pick, this little properties pane will update with whatever it can tell you about that component. So if I have the ground picked right now, you'll see that foot color is set to kind of a dark gray there, and we'll just change that to a white, and we'll see that update, and we get a really nice line art drawing. And I'll hit Create View. So now we've saved that off as a view here. I just hit this button, Create View, and we save that off. I'll go back to default, go back to view 3, and we're just loading that in and seeing that come in. So let's make some more views. I know we only have so much time here, so let's make some more views. Exploded views in Composer. Exploded views are one of the things you want to do most in SOLIDWORKS, right? Move parts around so we can see how they're put together. And SOLIDWORKS actually has a really nice group of tools for making exploded views. In the last 2 to 3 years, they've actually really enhanced SOLIDWORKS in making exploded views, some of the things you can do there. In years past, though, it was basically move things in one direction, right? You can move them linearly in one direction. Now there's some other stuff you can do. But in Composer, what you're going to find, you can do whatever you want. You can move these parts and whole groups of parts to any location with zero regard for messing up a mate or messing up a dimension or something like that. You're free here in Composer to do whatever you want. So let's just do an example. Maybe we'll take the caps to the propellers, take those off, and then take the propellers off as well. So if I just pick one of the caps, we'll just pick one to start with. It knows it's picked. I'll zoom in so we can see it, because it gets that kind of box around it. It gets almost like a extremity box kind of put around it. You know you have that whole thing picked, and it kind of highlights in that different color. So if we pick that one component, and then I was to go to transform. Transform has all sorts of things for moving parts around. Rotate them, translate them, linearly explode them. We'll do that one in just a second. Copy its movement from one part to another. Transform is loaded with all sorts of stuff you can do. One thing you want to immediately be aware of, though, is the mates are not here. The mates do not load in from SOLIDWORKS into Composer. Every mate, everything you've done in SOLIDWORKS, that kind of stays there. The components come in here, and you almost are alarmed by that initially, right? You're thinking, I did all that work and none of that stuff comes in. But you don't really want all that stuff here. All that stuff ends up being overhead and constraints. You just want to be able to move things around and make the views you want to make. Here in Composer, without those mates, you can do whatever you want. So if I take that cap and I just do a translate, you'll get a nice triad right on that component. Right from there, I can use the green arrow and just drag that up in space. I'm not, again, affecting a mate or anything like that. I'm just going to drop it up in space there. So Control-Z is your friend in Composer. Control-Z, just like it is in SOLIDWORKS, undo. I'll put that right back. Let's do all four at once. So if I pick 1, holding Control, 2, 3, and 4, you see it puts the triad right at the center, and I'll just move all those all up at once. This is easy stuff. Pick parts, use that triad, and move them around. So we'll drop those maybe right there in space somewhere. If I click off in space anywhere, the translate tool is still turned on. It's still currently turned on. So if I pick anything else, it immediately goes back into translate because that tool was kind of still turned on. So what I usually do, and I'm sure you folks are used to this with SOLIDWORKS as well, I just hit escape a few times, right? Hit escape like 3 or 4 times just to back all the way out. Do you have a question, sir?
Sorry, if I get to it. So if you bring a group of them up, and I know in SOLIDWORKS, if you bring them up and explode it, you have to gather command and reselect them all again to move a different direction. And I wish it was like move previous or select previous.
There is. So there's a lot of things you can do there. In Home, and I just dropped down Select, you have Select by color, which is nice. I really like that. Just I know this isn't exactly what you asked for, but Select All Invert Selection is another nice one. I think even Control-Z at that point would undo and go back to picking those parts. Let's try it with these propellers. So I know I'm going to move these up as well. So I pick one propeller, holding Control, 2, 3, and 4. I have all 4 of them picked. So I go to Transform, and then Translate, and I drop them up in space with that same green arrow, and I just kind of drop them there. They're still in Translate, so I can still continue to move them. Well, I could go this way now. You know, it did go up, and now it's going over. One movement is, yeah, so it's in SOLIDWORKS we call it steps, so it's one step at a time. I think you're right there. It kind of, it locks you out at that point. So you would want to maybe reselect them or something. I'm not sure. I'd have to, I'd have to experiment with it. But in Composer here, hey, we're doing it in Composer, so life's good. We can just keep on moving. So all I did was that one movement to get those components up in space. Again, I'll just kind of click in the background or just hit escape a couple times to undo that. Now you've moved those components, and they are actually moved in space, just as if you would want them to. Although this is a graphical program, this is not a CAD program, they move in vectors and directions that make sense. It knows how that thing was oriented in a SOLIDWORKS file, and it will pick a vector that makes sense. You notice that that triad, those axes that we were picking, they're not in some arbitrary direction, right? It knows how you built that file in SOLIDWORKS, where the origin was, how it was oriented, all that stuff comes into account. So when we're moving those around, they're going to choose and default to vectors that make sense and are typically useful for you. Yes? You can. That's a great question. So let's say we wanted to move one of them in a different direction. Let's just pick something else as an example, like the whole GoPro camera, for example. If I pick that GoPro camera and then do translate, it's going to use default axes that make sense that came from the file. But there's another button up here called Detect Curves. So if I turn that on, Detect Curves, it turns my mouse into almost, I'll call it a normal 2. If you're familiar with SOLIDWORKS and you have normal 2. It's now saying, all right, what face do you want to move that normal to be able to move that GoPro? So if you know it needed to move in a very specific location, it even kind of guesstimates at that stuff. You know, like SOLIDWORKS would never let you do that, just kind of tangent off of a curve. Composer's like, no, we'll do it. We'll get it close enough and we'll figure it out. And if I just pick this little face right here, now it's choosing that vector to move the camera. So something like that. So Detect Curves is definitely what you'd want to look for there. All right, so I know I got about 18 minutes here left, so let's continue moving. So if I got this component here, maybe just kind of in space, I'll double click anywhere in free space to fit the screen, and then I'll hit Create View. So now I've made a new view. I have my default, and then I have my View 4 where that comes out. I'm going to make probably 1 or 2 more for the sake of time here so I can make sure we get to animations and the other interactive content. So explodes with bill of materials. I would like to do a quick bill of material just so you guys can see the power of those. We have workshops in Composer. Workshops are how we create content. One of those workshops is bill of material. So if I turn on bill of material, what it says here, let me see if I can zoom in and talk about this for a second. My mouse will cooperate. What it says here is it's going to create a bill of material in one of two ways. It'll either compare properties or compare geometry. Bill of materials do not come in from SOLIDWORKS. Currently, there is an SPR for that. We want that to happen at some point. Currently, bill of materials do not come in from SOLIDWORKS to Composer. So you're almost remaking them here. But to a certain extent, you like that because in SOLIDWORKS, things are not necessarily grouped in the way that they will be for assembly, in certain steps, in certain positions, and you know, if 4 parts from one subassembly and 2 parts from the top level and all that are involved in one step of an assembly, that can be a little bit messy in SOLIDWORKS. Here in Composer, you can just pick whatever you want and make a parts list of any set group of components. So what it's going to do is it's going to compare property or compare geometry to number these parts. Compare property means look at the names. Is the name different? If the name is different, it gets a new name. If it's the same, it's an instance. It's another instance of that part. Or you can do compare geometry where it actually looks at the mass of every part, and every time it sees a new mass, it gets a new number, a new item number. So I'm going to keep it on compare property and just hit generate BOM IDs. We'll do it for the entire all geometry, generate BOM IDs. And in this case, if I scroll down, it found 48 unique items in this assembly. So if I have 48 unique items and I want to show that in a BOM table, show the table out here in space, I can hit show hide BOM table and that kind of pops up on the bottom. This is going to behave a little bit differently than you're used to in SOLIDWORKS. This isn't really the Excel-based approach or the table-based approach you might be used to. The table is actually coming from up here. This bill of material tab is what's generating that table. And if I pick this table, its outside border, it's showing me now properties for that table. So I can't remind you about that enough. This little properties pane is very dynamic. It's going to show you everything you pick. Here's properties for it. One of those properties, if I scroll down here, is placement. Where do you want it to be? Right now it's locked to the bottom of the view. So if I set that to free, I'll just hit free on that. Now you can drop this wherever you want, and one of the nice things it does is it regroups. As you drag and drop it around, it'll split off or regroup into multiple columns. So I'm going to just kind of maybe have it in 2 columns, and then we'll show our assembly right up above it, just like that, and then we'll hit View, Create View. So now I have a nice view where my bill of material is visible. I have my original default, I have my exploded view, and then of course we have our new view with the bill of material underneath. We're going to get to something you can do with that bill of material in just a little bit, but that's just a quick preview of what you can do with bill of materials. Another thing you can do, I really like, is section views. You all are familiar with section views in SOLIDWORKS, right? You can section parts away and show them. Composer, if I go to Author, you have this whole section here for making section views. This is a really great group of tools that will help you create some really high-end looking content. So if I go back to our default view, which I really like to have, it's nice to have that default to go back to, and I want to make a section that cuts through the component this way, like normal to this way, but kind of cuts through this way so we can move it back and forth. If you pre-select a face, it'll do what SOLIDWORKS does. It goes normal to that face. If you pre-select a component, it will only section that component. So you have some controls there, but before I do anything, I'm just going to hit Create, and then it puts me into that same tool we saw a second ago, where it's almost like normal to. It's asking you to pick a face to go normal to. I know that arrow is probably kind of crappy to see on the projector, but if I pick this face, it's now made a cutting plane normal to that face that I can drag back and forth and cut away. So although this is not SOLIDWORKS, this is not a CAD system, I can still do high-end section views here with this tool. This section view, if I have this border picked, what do you think it's showing me over here? It's showing me properties for the cutting plane. What do you want the cutting plane to look like? Do you even want to see the cutting plane? Maybe I'll just turn opacity all the way down so we don't even see the cutting plane, I just see the component. Again, one of my favorite things to do is just pick 1 or 2 components and just cut those away, and you end up with some really nice stuff. So if I hit Control Z here, and we'll pick, I don't know, a couple of these parts here. We'll pick maybe the main board and this part and maybe those lower boards as well. And I do the same thing, create, and I'll go normal to that side face. And now when I cut through, it only cuts those parts, the ones I had pre-selected. So if you're making, instruction manuals or just images for your website or something, that's high-end stuff. It's going to really show well, and I think people appreciate that kind of thing. So if I do assembly, or from the tab here, I'll hit Create View. Now we have, 5 views here. That'll have to be good enough for now. We're running a little short on time. So I'm dropping that there. I'll check View 3, View 4, View 5, we know it's good. It's got that bill of material. And then View 6 with our cutaway here. Again, I might want to hide this plane in some cases just because it kind of puts that shadow over everything. So if I pick that and do turn the opacity down. To save that change, Composer is actually pretty intelligent because if I go to switch, it kind of knows that there was a change to that previous view. So we'll go back to View 6. That should come back on. And it didn't save that change. So if I were to zoom back in here, you'll see that opacity still is where it was before. If you make a change to an existing view, so if I pick this and make that change, turn it down, you need to update that view with that change, or maybe save off a new one if you wanted to. But I can right-click that view and say Update View, and now that change is saved in there. Again, illustrating the fact that that property is what you're saving off in that view. That view is what's remembering what that change is. Okay, so there's a couple others I want to make, but for the sake of time, we will move forward. So we've got some images to work with now. The final thing you might want to do with images is save them out. Use them in some Word or some content creation tool to make those different images. In workshops, where I was before, we have high-res image workshop. And in that workshop, when it opens, you can control things like the pixels, the DPI, remove the ground, use a white background on all the images, all really good photo quality images settings that you want to use. You can even do high-resolution JPEGs. It'll take a little longer to render the images out, but they end up looking a lot nicer. And I mentioned naming templates before. On multiple here, one of the things it says it's going to do is save out all of the views instead of just the one you have active. So if you think about what this is doing, it's going to batch export all those views you have and use this naming template. The naming template is file name _ view name. So file name is just this whole drone, the whole thing we're working on, this big long name, and then underscore the view name. So now we start to remember why these view names are important. So maybe this one we want to call line art, and maybe view 4 here we'll call explode. If I could learn to type left-handed. And view 5 we'll call bill of material. That has our bill of material in it. And view 6 we'll call cutaway or something like that. So now I have all those names on those views. So if I hit views and we do save as, and I choose a location from desktop, we'll just make a new folder called Composer. We'll go into that folder and we'll save those out. See on the bottom, it was just taking a second there just to publish all of them. But if I check that folder on my desktop now, big messy group of files here, here's all of those files. We just batch exported that quickly, and it used the appropriate naming template, the name template we chose, which was, let's zoom in here, the name of the file underscore the name of the view that view was in. This is how you start to take this content, drop it in Word, create your technical documentation with it, and then if anything ever changes, you just re-export the same images with the same names and overwrite these old images. Any content that you used that used those images, it doesn't know any differently. It's just looking for the name of that image, right? So if you overwrite that image with one of the same name, Word that is pulling those files, Publisher that's pulling those files, your website that's pulling those files, it doesn't know any differently. It's just pulling that appropriate name. So that's why that naming template is very powerful. That's very useful stuff. You just have to pay attention to what your view names are there. All right, so we got name views done. I know I kind of went over on that, but again, that's bread and butter. That is the low-hanging fruit of Composer. You can see how quickly you can do that stuff. We're going to do a quick demo of animations here, and then we'll finish up with some interactive content. So animations, they're fast, they're easy to create, they're very similar if you've ever used like a movie editing software. It's a little similar to SOLIDWORKS as well. SOLIDWORKS has a auto keys mode and some of the movements that you're familiar with in SOLIDWORKS Motion. And in Composer, auto keys really does most of the work for you. So let's just take a quick look. Let's make an animation, something simple, like one of these propellers turning, for example. That's something we'd want to see in SOLIDWORKS, right, or in with this assembly. So if I turn on Home, Animation Timeline, it turns on this timeline at the bottom. This will feel very similar to you if you're used to this keyed timeline approach to making animations. I really like this. I've done some pretty cool stuff with it, and I've seen a lot of our customers do some nice stuff with it as well. So let's make an animation where this propeller turns. We want this animation to start with our default view. So one of the first things you'll notice is these views, you can put them on the timeline. Say right at that 0 mark, I want that view to be where it starts. And it even names it. It puts a little tag up here with default, the name of the view you drag and dropped right there. So after maybe we'll go over 1 second or 2 seconds, I want the camera to zoom in. I want that little camera angle to change. So if I just zoom my mouse and then hit camera key, this little button right here, set camera key, it records that little change there. It records that movement. So my underlying theme here for Composer animations is you just set A and B. You set where it should be at A and where it should be at B, and it does that transition for you. It kind of interpolates between the two. So even just this, if I were to go back and now hit play, it just translates from one view to the next. Okay, so great. We've made a little camera transition here. So maybe at 2 seconds, this propeller should start turning. I pick the propeller. It should start spinning at that point once we zoom in. So I picked the propeller. I now have the propeller chosen. And I want the propeller to be here at 2 seconds. So I set keys with this button here, set location key. You almost don't see anything happen. That's kind of like the little bit that throws you off with Composer animations. It doesn't really look like anything happens, but it does put a key there. There is a key kind of behind there that you just set with that little set keys. It's a little bit difficult to see, but using filters you can actually dig through there and see them. So I've set that at 2 seconds. I want that blade to be there. And then maybe over 4 more seconds, all the way out to 6, I want that blade to spin a certain amount. So if I'm out at 6 and I pick the blade, we go to transform and we rotate, you can spin it at this point manually. If I were to move it a certain amount, Composer would actually record that and animate that transition. Problem is, you can only drag it up to 180 degrees before it starts counting back. So you're only going to get half that movement. So what you can do instead is if I hover over this little axis here and I pick on this, instead of dragging this myself and picking something, you'll notice if I come all the way over here to the properties pane, I can type in a value. I'll just type in a value of 4,000 degrees, something like that. Hit enter. And it makes all those little keys for me. It moved it in increments to record all those subtle movements to eventually equal that whole 4,000 degree movement. So now rewind, hit play, and then we see that spin over that period of time. That is easy stuff, and you don't have to be an expert with your CAD file or with Composer to do something like that pretty quickly. This can be easily saved out to an AVI, used on a website, used at a marketing material, trade show materials, that kind of stuff. It's very easy to create. I know this is a really short demo, but the message here with Composer animations, set A, set B, and let it do the transition for you between the 2 points. It will do all the work for you in those cases. Those little bits about it only being able to move a certain amount are tricky at first, but once you realize that when you pick it, you have its properties here. Any property in the tree, any property here can be animated over time. So if I change its color, it can change color over time. If I change its size, if I change its opacity, all of these things can be animated and changed over time. When you have a component picked, if I pick this top part here, as long as it doesn't have this little red symbol next to it, this little red dot, you see this guy here, as long as it doesn't have that, you can animate it over time. That's what that red dot means. You can't change this in an animation. Everything can. You can really have these parts change and change color, change size, change location, everything over time. All right, so we've got our really complicated animation saved in there. That looks good. Jumping back to PowerPoint here. Animations, they're fast, easy to create, similar to movie editing software. Auto keys does all that work for you. It will record all of that work. Finally, interactive content. Interactive content is a wide variety of stuff. It really falls into either 2 categories, 2D or 3D interactive content. Let's take a look at 2D. So if I'm in Composer and I like that view with the bill of material that we made. So I go to the bill of material and I go to our workshops under, we'll do tech illustration. Tech illustration, I'll zoom in here so we can see it, will take what you have active on the screen and save it out as an SVG, a scalable vector graphics file, a really nice vector graphics file that's viewable in a web browser. You also get highlighting and almost, they call it hotspots, where you hover over a component and it kind of highlights and shows you what it is. So let's save one out. Let's create an example here. So if I have this and we hit save as actually, and I'll just go on my desktop. I'm still in that Composer file, right? And if you see what it's going to name it here, the same name as the original assembly.svg, scalable vector graphics file. And we'll hit save. It takes a second. You see it's kind of chugging on the bottom. It's making a hotspot for every one of those line items in the bill of material. It's linking it to the assembly that's up above it. So if I now go take a look at that file on my desktop, it's right here, .svg. You notice it's already telling me it wants to open in a web browser. I've had much better luck with Internet Explorer with these types of files. And ask me later. Come on, you can open, you can do it. Let's do it one more time. This is the only part that gives me trouble sometimes. All right, let's try Chrome. Maybe Chrome will be my savior. There it is. Chrome did it. You always got to love Chrome. So when you have the file open, you get highlighting between the components. This is interactive. So if you're on a touch screen, again, on an assembly line or a trade show or a website or something, you're hovering over this, you get interaction between the part on screen and the part in the list. I compare this to microfiches for old motorcycle parts, and you're digging through those terrible diagrams looking for parts. Compare it to this, where it actually highlights it and shows you what it is. It's awesome, and it saves this out for you that quickly. I got about 1 minute left before I'm running over time here, but let's go back to Composer. One final thing you can do for interactive content is hit Save As. I'll do Publish, actually. Publish, HTML, and HTML output. I'll just pick something simple here, and we'll make a new folder in here called HTML, and hit Save. It will publish all that out. Now I have that HTML folder, and we'll open this with Internet Explorer, allow block content. I'm really going fast here, but what this does is it embeds Composer Player into Internet Explorer. So this made a little HTML file that if you think about what you can do with this, you can take this and run with it, integrate it into your website, do something really cool with it, put it on a jump drive or something, deliver it to somebody, and now they have some really easy way to open and view these parts, and it embedded itself into Composer Player, into Internet Explorer there. Final note on that type of content. This stuff, I'd say, is phase 2 for implementing Composer. It's more difficult. It takes a little bit more experience to get it exactly how you want it. I've seen people right away get productive with images and animations. Right away. That stuff is so easy to make with training, with a simple 2 or 3 day training class. You're off and running. This stuff takes a little bit more work, but you can see the power of it. You can see how much you could do with it if you want. I was going to update. We don't have time for that, but updating Composer, just know that as long as the name doesn't change from SOLIDWORKS, as long as the name is the same, Composer will update and have no problem with it. These slides will be available to you as well on the SOLIDWORKS website afterwards, so you guys can get these. But the main thing is the name. Everything comes from the name in SOLIDWORKS, and those settings, when we first opened it, I said import, merge files into one actor per part. Use that SOLIDWORKS import profile. Life will be good. This thing will update really well. Update asks you the same questions. How do you want to bring this in? Choose SOLIDWORKS import profile. Composer tips and tricks. This is what we'll finish with. Disable in SOLIDWORKS, large assembly mode, large design review, and automatically load components lightweight. When SOLIDWORKS opens briefly to bring that file in, if it kicks on large assembly mode waters down your file and doesn't bring everything in. It causes a lot of problems with Composer. Jennifer from SOLIDWORKS, she's not here, but I took a great presentation with her over the summer, and she taught me a lot of that great stuff. So large assembly mode is the big one. Watch for that in SOLIDWORKS. That can really get you. Don't install SOLIDWORKS importer and SOLIDWORKS. It really doesn't let you anymore. It used to be a bigger problem than it is now. Watch for that. Use Set as SOLIDWORKS. In the settings for Composer, to make sure your mouse, to make sure everything's the same, there's a button that says Set as SOLIDWORKS. That will make your mouse controls and everything feel exactly like what you're used to with SOLIDWORKS. When you're exporting these files, get Xvid codec. It's a free codec that you can get if you just Google it. I've had really great luck with it. The codecs that load with Windows out of the box aren't so great. Xvid codec does a really good job of knitting that together and making it look like a really clean AVI when you export those animations out. Assembly selection mode is big. I don't have time to show it to you, but the other last thing I'll mention, I can't tell you how many Composer tech cases I've solved with this. Check your NVIDIA graphics settings, use Dassault Systems settings. So if I just go to my desktop here and I right click on my desktop, you have NVIDIA control panel. That'll open up NVIDIA control panel. That always takes a second to open. But if you go to manage 3D settings, this is how you're telling your graphics card just kind of presets, how it should act out of the box. Choose Dassault Systems CATIA compatible here. That solves a lot of really strange graphical stuff with Composer. It really likes to have it set like this. SOLIDWORKS does too. SOLIDWORKS, you really should have it set like this as well. If you have an NVIDIA card, right click on your desktop, find the network manager there. The NVIDIA manager there. All right. Where's my PowerPoint? I'm starting to lose it, folks. We're getting towards the end here. Here we go. Current slide. Agenda review, we talked about what TechDoc is with or without Composer. We imported those files into Composer. We created images, animations, and interactive content. We didn't have time to update, but again, just the names. Keep the names the same. It will do a very good job of updating. And then we hit some general Composer tips and tricks. Any questions? I'm here. I can even talk to you outside afterwards as well. I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have. And don't forget to fill out surveys as well right on the app on your smartphone if you have it. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it. I know that was a lot there, but thank you.